this is capitulation on my part. Okay, I give up officially. The quarantine has done me in. I feel unable to give sort of my usual kind of lecture. So I had 4 cups of coffee, and still this is not enough. So, but hopefully this is going to work. So in principle, please keep your microphones off. But I think throughout the lecture, I'll give you a chance to ask questions in case somebody wants to ask questions. Okay, let me switch on the timer so that I know for how long I'm talking. Okay. So and feel free to let me know if you like this format better than the YouTube. Maybe it's better. Probably it should be better. So okay, my timer is on. I'll be walking around. You see, Aristotle, I keep using this joke. Aristotelian school was called the Peripatetics because they liked to walk while they philosophize. And this is very much my own approach. Yeah, unless I walk, I cannot think at the same time. So, yeah. So basically, the plan today is to talk about Kant, but also to revise Hume. And there's a general consensus. Well, Kant is a very popular philosopher. Kant is an extremely popular philosopher. It's like he's widely considered to be the most important philosopher of all times and places, Immanuel Kant. And I have to tell you that personally, I disagree with that assessment. I spent a lot of time trying to wrap my head around Kant, and I think that whenever Kant is right, he's right because he's plagiarizing Hume. Well, he's not plagiarizing Hume, he's relying on Hume. So whenever Kant agrees with Hume, he's right. But whenever he tries to go beyond Hume, I think he oversteps the boundary of good sense. And this is going to be my attempt to elucidate that today. My opinion, so this is a very controversial opinion. I want to signal this from the beginning. Many people would disagree with what I said a second ago, and my justification, I think, for my position would be that, well, again, like, appeal to authority. Are you supposed to be convinced by appeal to authority? No. But if I had to call on some authority to support my position, I could talk Bertrand Russell. Bertrand Russell is a famous British logician and mathematician, and basically, if I had to rely on somebody, it would be Russell in my assessment. My face looks terribly orange, but I'm not sure if there's anything I can really do about that. So you'll just have to bear with my orange face. Anyway, so let's start from afar. Let's start from the very beginning. So in this class, since the very first class, when we started talking about the sophists, we were walking around this notion. We were moving around this notion of epistemology. So epistemology, episteme, in Greek means knowledge, basically. So epistemology is a discipline that studies knowledge, right? Tells us, what can we know? And sort of ask this question: how do we know the things that we think that we do know, right? And so the first order of business, in some sense, is to establish this question: how does epistemology relate to politics or to ethics, right? And I think, broadly speaking, there's a direct link between epistemology and ethics, or epistemology and political philosophy. And in many ways it goes back, I think, to maybe to Socrates, to Plato. Again, this notion that if you want to act in a certain way, you'd better know what is the right thing to do. You'd better know what you're trying to achieve, right? So it seems to be it seems that there's a direct link between goodness and knowledge, right? If anything is good at all, you should be able to give like human beings as rational creatures should be able to give an account person as an individual should be able to give an account as to why they think a particular thing is right. So I'm going to share my screen now, and hopefully you can see it. So so basically, again, I'm talking about epistemology and its relation to ethics and politics. So it's again, question of knowledge, question of truth. So so how does questions of truth relate to morality? It's like truth in general, and then moral and political truth, moral or political truth. And in many ways, I think this goes back to Socrates, who very famously asserted that virtue or goodness, right? Virtue or goodness is in important ways, identical to knowledge. Sort of before, like the most important practical aspect of philosophy is like knowing what is right. And Kant, whom we'll talk about later today, very famously said that there are three most important questions, and these three most important questions are what can I know? What should I do? What can I hope for? So maybe I'm not even sure. Should I write this differently? Okay, let's do it this way. So what can I know? What should I do? What can I hope for? And these three questions, Kant says, can be reduced to the fourth one, which is the most important. What is a human being? So what can I know? What should I do? What can I hope for? And these three questions are reducible to the fourth most fundamental question: what is a human being? What is a human being? And notice the last question is a question of knowledge. Knowledge. And this question, like what should I do? This is the question of ethics and politics. So again, for Socrates, for Kant, but also for Descartes and for so many other philosophers, there's a certain primacy of knowledge vis-a-vis ethics. Like before you can say what is good, you should be able to establish it. Mm-hmm. And I could get to okay, let's not beat around the bush. Let's not beat around the bush. What the conclusions are going to be? So basically, we're going to see two schools of thought. So the first school of thought is going to be well, actually, maybe even let me do this on a separate slide. So how does knowledge relate to goodness, right? And for people like Hobbes, Hume, and Mill, the idea is that nothing is good. Nothing is good by itself. And you could say, how does Hobbes, Hume, and Mill know this? And they are skeptics. So skeptics, and as skeptics, they would say, prove to me, show me what is the definition of the word good, of goodness. What is the definition or derivation? What is the rational procedure to establish like universal goodness, to establish universal goodness? And Hobbes, Hume, and Mill are going to say, look, this rational procedure does not seem to exist. Now, philosophically minded students among you will understand that in principle, in philosophy, it is impossible to prove a negative. It is never possible to prove a negative statement. So right now, I'm in this room, and let's imagine I try to prove to you that there is no invisible pink unicorn, well, not pink, right? Invisible unicorn floating right here, right? You could say, how can I prove that there is no invisible unicorn? Sort of, you don't see it. Yeah, okay, but it's invisible. I can't touch it. Well, let's suppose it's also ethereal, like my hand passes right through it. So how can I prove that there is no invisible unicorn here? It's impossible to prove a negative. So in this sense, skeptical arguments, like skeptics cannot prove that God does not exist. And skeptics cannot prove that goodness, universal goodness, does not exist. But they say, look, until somebody shows me a valid proof for the existence of God, or a valid, a valid proof that there's a unicorn, basically, like it doesn't do me any good. So can't prove a negative. Can't prove a negative statement. So we proceed basically by it's like we're gonna assume that there's no God, assume no God, and assume no universal goodness until somebody gives us a proof. Until somebody gives us until somebody proves it to be otherwise, right? And basically they would say, look, we've been looking for hundreds of years, and nobody seems to be able to make any progress in that direction. And in fact, we'll talk about this more today. There seems to be some preliminary argument to say that maybe these things are impossible to prove, although you can never state this definitively, right? Because as empiricists, especially people like Hume would say that, look, our experience today is such that we do not know what is universal goodness, and we do not see God. But who knows? Maybe our experience tomorrow will change dramatically, and somehow we will be able to tackle these questions. So who knows? But so far, nobody has been able to do that. But I think, again, if you are willing, if you want to be an empiricist, and again, empiricism comes from the Greek word empiria, meaning experience, right? So so yeah, Hobbes, Hume, and Mill are empiricists. All three of them, empiricists. So empiricists and skeptics at the same time. Okay. Yeah. So so this is the position of Hobbes, Hume, and Mill, but especially because this class is on Hume, so especially of Hume. And Kant's position is, broadly speaking, it's should I write Locke? Well, maybe Locke as well. Locke and Kant are going to say no. Reason can establish morality. So Hobbes, Hume, and Mill say nothing is good by itself, and Kant and Locke are going to say no. Reason can establish universal values. And so we say, okay, so these guys are going to say, Hobbes, Hume, and Mill, nothing is good by itself. So therefore, and this is an important, many of you are going to be writing about Mill next year, and Hobbes as well. So, what is the meta-ethical justification of the position of Hobbes, Hume, and Mill? Like, how can we know basically what is good if we don't have a rational justification? And Hobbes, Hume, and Mill are going to, in many ways, say hi to Epicurus. So, so compare to Epicurus. You will notice, by the way, this CF is Latin for compare, in fact. So I use this a lot. So compared to Epicurus, they would say that we do not know what is good universally, but we know that people, as a matter of fact, do what they want. So as a matter of fact, people do what is pleasant. Do what is pleasant to them. So this is sort of a deflationary argument. So deflation. So we know capital V values, know capital M meaning of life, but simply, cheerfulness, pleasure, something like that. Like simply, life devoid of suffering. Well, anyway, simply, maximization of pleasure and avoidance of pain. Simply seek pleasure and avoid pain. Yeah, this is Hobbes, Hume, and Mill. And Kant says, no, let's find a way, and Locke also had this argument, let's find a way to how reason can establish universal values. And this is what we're going to talk about later today. Okay, so these are the conclusions. But let me take a step back and talk about epistemology proper. So epistemology in Hume and Kant. So and let's start with Hume. Well, yeah, incidentally, yeah, I'm going to be keeping, so feel free to write in the chat. So incidentally, I see some of you are writing in the chat. Yeah, so I think, and thank you, Artur. I think this is indeed a very big problem for Kant and Locke. If they say that reason can establish universal values, how do you explain conflict? This is a problem. How do you explain, can Kant and Locke explain conflict? How can Kant and Locke explain, facts, or I don't say facts, instances, particular instances of genocide, right? So, like in general, this would be problem of evil. Because you see, if reason can establish universal values, then why is there no consensus? If it's true, why is there no consensus? To this day, no consensus. Because, in the United Nations, like take any political situation, there's never a consensus. And not just about interpretation of facts, but there's no consensus about values either, right? And so philosophers like Max Weber, for example, would say that, politics is a sphere of irreducible conflict of interest. So something like that. And you see, again, so for Hobbes, Hume, and Mill, there is rational politics, but rational politics simply is common interest. So rational politics simply is calculation of common interest. And for Kant and Locke, rational politics has to be something else. Okay, let me go back a step and let me try to make a broader philosophical point. So I tried to talk about this last lecture, but last lecture did not go very well for me. So let me try to talk about this again. So again, how do we know anything in general? How do we know anything at all? That's a good question. Like ever since we're children, we try to interact with the world. So how can we know anything at all? How do I know that this world exists? I have a marker. I don't have a board, unfortunately, but I have a prop, right? I have a marker from the good old days before the quarantine, when we were all in the university and markers were actually a thing. I should buy a board, although I'm not sure if with this lighting you'd be able to see what's on the board. Anyway, sorry, I digress. So I'm standing right here. I am giving this lecture. I'm looking at this marker. How do I know that this marker exists? And it seems that, since time immemorial, philosophers have pointed to two ways of knowing things. So knowledge derived from pure reason, like math, or derived from experience. And these two ways, broadly speaking, can be referred to as empiricism and rationalism. So I talked about this last time a little bit. Yes. So let me try to talk about this in more detail today. So yeah, so we have matters of fact and relations of ideas, right? I don't know. Go back to this. I'm standing here. I'm looking at this marker in broad light at point blank range. How do I know that this marker is there? Right? You could say, well, maybe I can derive it mathematically. Well, Not exactly, although we will find some philosophers in the history of philosophy. Is this important for this class? No, it's completely not important. I'm just being pedantic. But people like Leibniz, for example, you might have heard of Leibniz. Leibniz will say that if there's really a marker in front of my face, this statement is true only because you can derive it logically. He says like these statements for Leibniz would be like infinitely analytical, like in the mind of God. I have to be able to show mathematically how this world is the best of all possible worlds. So it is mathematically necessary, because this world is the best of all possible worlds, that when I stand here and look at this marker, it's actually here in front of my face. So if this sounds like complete gibberish, you're not alone. Many philosophers agree with that it's complete and utter gibberish. The basic philosophical position these days in the 21st century is empiricism. So this position on the left side of the board. So I know that there's a marker because I experience it. So I have an experience of the marker in front of my face. And as a matter of fact, Hume, when he talks about these relations of ideas, so when he talks about truths of mathematics or logic or geometry, Hume is going to point to the following thing. He's going to say, in general, we tend to assume, right, that in mathematics and in logic, if your procedure is correct, then your conclusions are necessary. So these statements or truths of reason, they are necessary truths. Necessary truths. Sometimes they're also called analytical. Analytical meaning that you know the truth of the statement simply by analyzing the words in the statement. Like, for example, this: all triangles have three sides. Or actually, you could say all triangles are blue. So, no, sorry. All triangles are triangles. All triangles, are triangles. This is an example of an analytical statement, right? And the idea is that it has to be true by definition, that all triangles are triangles. Although this is not a very interesting piece of knowledge, as you can imagine. Yeah. One second. Now, this would all be fun and nice, but the problem is that into the 21st century, this right-hand side column, right, relations of ideas. So in the 21st century, we don't believe that these statements can actually be proven. Well, first of all, David Hume talks about the following thing. He says, can you really trust these statements about relations of ideas? Can you trust mathematics? And Hume says, well, ultimately, at the end of the day, you cannot really trust mathematics because it is possible to make mistakes. Very often it happens, and you must have had this experience, that you do a mathematical calculation. You try to, I don't know, multiply 24 by 57, right? And you try to multiply that, and it's possible to make a mistake. So it's possible to feel certain, but actually make a mistake. Possible to be confident, yet mistaken. That's a problem. That's a problem. And let me delete this, I guess. So it's possible to be confident yet mistaken. And at the same time, there is this, again, long project in philosophy of logic and mathematics to try to derive arithmetic from logic. Can you derive arithmetic from logic? And the answer is no. And the answer is no. And this is a very famous Gödel's incompleteness theorem. PowerPoint, help me. Yes. Gödel's incompleteness theorem. You can look this up in your spare time if you want. It's an interesting idea in many ways. Again, Gödel has, so to speak, formally proven that if you have a logical system which is rich enough to encompass arithmetic, it must have unproven axioms, unproven and unprovable axioms. And if it's unproven, right, unproven axioms, then how do you know? Maybe your axioms are wrong. So basically, the right-hand side kind of goes out the window, and we are left with the left-hand side, right? So we have to talk about these matters of fact, which are derived from experience. Yeah, it's wonderful, because when I wrote this, there's snow outside my window. It was true, but now it's no longer true. You see, that this is the problem of matters of fact. They are changing. So relations of ideas are necessary and analytical, and these are not necessary. They are contingent. Contingent means unnecessary, and they're called synthetic, because you synthesize the meaning of the statement from experience, if you want. They rely on experience. Well, yeah, I have this word experience here, up here. And again, this is in principle, we have a class on political philosophy, and this is a bit of like more classical standard philosophy of well, general philosophy, you know, epistemology and ontology. So again, I look at this marker at point blank range. What can I really say? And David Hume is going to tell us not much, not much. So it seems to me right now that I am giving a lecture. It seems to me right now that I'm giving a lecture. But am I really? It seems to me that I'm looking at a marker, but am I really? Could it be that I am making right now a mistake? And Hume says, yes, very much. I've been teaching for about 10 years now. And do you know how many times I've had dreams about teaching classes? Dozens of times, maybe hundreds of times. And while I'm asleep, it very much seems to me that I'm actually giving a class. But then I wake up and realize, oh no, it was just a dream. So can I be certain right now that I am not dreaming? And Hume says no. And Hume says no. So this is deep and important ground for skepticism in Hume, right? So it's possible to be wrong. So possible that you are wrong. Again, so I said possible to be confident yet mistaken. Same thing here. It's possible to be confident yet mistaken. It's kind of disconcerting truth on both sides of the aisle. Possible to be confident, completely confident, and yet mistaken. Especially, you know, like especially if you think of nightmares, like you dream of something and sort of it feels real and you really are afraid, and then it was just a dream. So, and these would be like empirical sciences, like, I don't know, physics, biology, political science, maybe, who knows. And so the ideas cannot, sorry, I'm just can't derive arithmetic from logic. Can't. So kind of same thing here. It is possible. Well, okay, sorry. Like sort of you cannot logically derive arithmetic or mathematics, and likewise here. When we do physical sciences, so on the left-hand side of the board, when we talk about matters of fact, when we talk about these so-called synthetic statements, there's a problem, and the problem is the following. That, again, when I look at the marker, the only thing that I can really truly say is that it seems to me that there's a marker in front of my face. And that's definitely true. It seems to me that there's a marker in front of my face. I cannot be mistaken about that. But is there really a marker in front of my face? I cannot know. And actually, Isaac Newton realized this. Isaac Newton, of all people, realized this. He actually realized it with the help of John Locke. And in his later edition of his most famous work, Principia Mathematica, he included the statement in Latin, something like hypothesis non fingo, which is I do not feign hypotheses. I do not feign hypotheses. And this is from Newton. And the idea is that Newton is basically saying, look, I look through my telescope, I observe what happens in the sky, and I can give you a formula. And this formula, let's say F equals ma, it seems that this formula, this formula appears to describe the past. It appears that this formula describes the past well. But is there any guarantee that it will continue to hold in the future? And the answer is no. So do I know? Like, will the future resemble the past? Okay, I have Kant derive arithmetic from logic. Kant prove that future will resemble the past. Future will resemble the past. Let me try to beautify this a little bit. Yeah. So basically, again, this notion that, by the way, so some of you have asked me, but sort of, we have our contemporary science. Isn't our science certain? And the answer is, well, not exactly. Again, we have this wonderful formula. I can paste it into the PowerPoint. This is the so-called Lagrangian of the standard model of particle physics. This is the best and most widely tested formula in all of physics. But the problem is that people like Hume would say the only thing that this formula is like it's tracking patterns in past experience. Up until this point, it appears that basic interactions that we have observed in laboratories followed this formula within a certain margin of error, to a certain degree of precision. But do we know whether this formula is true? We don't know. And like, again, when you look through this telescope or when you look through the microscope, you observe certain regularities, but you do not observe any deep fundamental reason for these regularities. You don't know why these regularities are there. And again, this is exactly what Newton was saying. He was saying, basically, I observe how planets move, and I can make certain conclusions about the regularity of motion, but I cannot really tell you why it has to be the case, and there's nothing to guarantee that the future will resemble the past. Okay, so this is important because basically it establishes an important skeptical element. So therefore, empiricism leads to skepticism. Empiricism leads to skepticism because basically, simply when we pay close attention to our experience, we realize that there is nothing in our experience to guarantee like the validity of conclusions that we make from our experience. So like in the simplest possible formulation, Hume is going to say, look, I cannot experience next Tuesday, therefore I am not entitled to predict with 100% certainty what's going to happen next Tuesday. And if I cannot predict with 100% certainty, actually, if I think about this, I cannot predict with any certainty. So, my ideas about the future are deeply irrational, says Hume, at the end of the day. So let me also, because I want to bring this to the questions of sort of active character of perception. What the hell am I talking about? I let this marker go, and it falls. And the question is, when I look at this marker falling, what do I see, right? So I let it go and it falls down. And Hume is going to say that if you pay close attention to experience, you see one event, me letting the marker go, and another event, the marker falling. So there's a certain B that follows after an event A. So I see what I see, or I experience. So experience only a constant conjunction I do not see a necessary connection. So let me probably do this just to make sure. Come on, it's got to be somewhere. Yes. No, yes, works. So you can never see a necessary connection. So you see one event followed by another event. You see a consequence, right? A sequence of events, but you do not see the causation. So it's like basically the idea is that you can only observe correlation and never causation. So correlation, never causation. And good science knows this. So it's like this is as close as you can come to a universally accepted conclusion. Like any good textbook on science or philosophy of science will tell you this. Our best physical theories, this wonderful formula here. Oh yeah, I'm still spotlighted. Yeah. So this wonderful formula here, it talks about correlation in the past. There's nothing to suggest a causal, causal conclusion that something causes something else, or that there are forces in nature. We don't know that. We don't see that. So it means that, but we have this very vivid feeling of so correlation, never causation. We have a vivid feeling or a vivid impression of the cause of causation, but it does not come from experience. But it is not derived from experience. Actually, it's not derived. It's not derived from experience of the objects themselves, from the experience of the objects. Instead, it comes from our imagination. If you want to be completely pedantic, because Hume is a skeptic and an empiricist, you should say that it doesn't come from imagination, because notice, this is a causal claim. This is a causal claim. How can, like, if Hume says that we can never experience causation, can we experience mental causation? No. So it doesn't come, it appears to come. From our imagination. And Hume is talking about the way our mind works, right? But can Hume be sure? Can we be sure about the future? Can we be sure of the future? And the answer is no. Can we be sure that our mind will continue to work the same way in the future? And the answer is no. Can we be sure that our minds will be the same in the future? Will be the same in the future? And the answer is again no. But again, this important idea that vivid impression of we have a vivid impression of causation, but it's not derived from experience. Instead, it appears to come from our imagination alone. So, but this is, an active character of perception, an active character of perception. So this is again in Hume. Well, actually in Kant as well. Active character of perception. And again, this idea, Kant and Hume, but especially Hume, compares this. So compare this similar to aesthetic experience. We say beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? Right. So this idea that you look at, one person looks at a painting and they see a beautiful painting. Another person looks at the same painting and sees an ugly painting. The ugliness or the beauty is not in the painting. It is in your eye. It is in your imagination, if you want. It's not in the thing itself. Something is broken with my sharing. PowerPoint, what are you doing? Okay, I hope you can see it now again. Anyway. So beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but also causation is in the eye of the beholder. But also, again, notice this will. Let's continue to extrapolate. Goodness is in the eye of the beholder, and this is exactly this idea. And so also authority. So we're going to talk about authority in a second. Authority. No, this is not how you spell authority, but word will help me. So so this is Hobbes's whatsoever is the object, right, of any man's. This is a quote you should know by heart. Whatsoever is the object of any man's appetite or desire is that which he for his part calls good, and the object of his hate and aversion is what he calls evil, there being nothing simply and absolutely so, right? This is exactly the phrase. Or Hume says, reason is and ought to be the slave of the passion. Reason is the slave of the passion. I forget. Let's see, passion. So authority is in the eye of the beholder. So this idea that nobody is a policeman or a criminal or a king or a teacher or a beggar, policeman, criminal, teacher, beggar, whatever, by nature. It is our imagination. Like we imagine people to be that, right? So, and this is something I mentioned last time, again, social construction of reality. Social construction of reality. In your third year international relations, you will talk about this specifically. Like, there's no such thing as genocide. There's no such thing as just war or an evil invasion. We construct things in a certain way. So okay, it's controversial, of course. Everything is controversial in philosophy, but okay, even let me add this to the list. Nothing is a genocide by nature. We bring to bear our assumptions to the world. And again, it's an important idea that we see also. So we see it already in Hume, but Kant is going to make a big deal out of this. So let me continue. So again, so this is in Hume, but also in Kant. Well, with the exception of maybe this goodness, well, Hume and partially Kant. Well, okay. So Hume, how should I write this? Hume and partially Kant. Okay, let me waste a couple seconds. I'm wasting too much time in this class already, but let me waste some more. Come on, mathematical symbols. Oh yeah, I got the symbol I wanted. No? Okay. So It's not the best symbol, but whatever. So partially, this is going to be in Kant. So Kant talks about, this is famous Kant's Copernican revolution. Kant is being very modest. He actually called this his own Copernican revolution. He compares himself to Copernicus. He said, no, Copernicus was great, I'm as great as Copernicus. So Copernicus basically says that we thought, Copernican revolution, well, yeah, Copernicus, that there's the sun and there's the earth, and they swap places. Okay, I'm sure I can do this quickly. Or not. What are my mathematical symbols? What are my arrows? Damn it. This is not good. Wow. This is why, you know, this is why we need a board and not this. I am sad right now. This is what we spend time in the lecture on. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Okay. Should I use this arrow? I wonder. Well, I would prefer a different style arrow, but okay, this one will have to do. So this is what Copernicus says. And Kant's Copernican revolution is similar, but again, whereas here we're talking again about the relative positions of the sun and the earth, here we're talking about, so to speak, mind and world. So let's be careful, right? So people used to think that the earth was the center. And now Copernicus says, no, it's actually the sun that's the center. Right? Likewise, people thought that the world existed in a certain way. And again, there's a certain idea that goes back to Theaetetus, this idea of impressions. Impression, right? That the world actively impressions, right, on your mind, impresses on the mind, right? And Copernicus and Kant says, no. It's the other way around. So he says, mind is active. So according to Kant, not this, but mind is active in the sense that, so it's like, it's not the objects, it's not like the mind conforms to the objects of experience. It is the objects of experience that conform to the mind. Yeah. So our cognition, we used to think that our cognition conforms to the objects of experience, but actually objects of experience conform to our cognition. So it's not that cognition, our cognition, let's say my cognition conforms to the objects. Yes. So mind is active, something like that, blah, blah, blah. But objects of experience conform to our cognition. Yes. Conform, or if you want, not conform, but are actively constructed by. Are actively constructed by the mind, my mind. So the simplest way I have of phrasing it. So again, so world impressive, but here, so world is active, cognition is passive. Here, mind is active, and world is passive. You know, the world passively supplies. The world passively supplies raw data. I don't know, raw material, raw material. Okay, so the simplest way I have of phrasing this is that perception is actually in an important part imagination. So perception is, to some extent, imagination. Now, when we talk about it this way, to some extent, because perception is not completely imagination. How do I know this? How do I know this? And the test is very simple. You know, if I close my eyes, I can imagine whatever I want. So I close my eyes and I imagine a Sherman Firefly, or I can imagine a Sturmgewehr or something like that, right? So I close my eyes, I can do that. But when I open my eyes, I see my laptop or I see this marker. And no matter how hard I try, I cannot imagine it to be otherwise. So perception is partly imagination, but it's not completely imagination. And again, it's like this. So perception is to some extent imagination, but it's mostly involuntary imagination, involuntary, or if you want, unconscious imagination, something like that. And again, the idea is that, again, if you look at this marker, the notion is that different, like science tells us that presumably, right, different animals have different perceptual apparatus. So for example, frogs can see in infrared, and you can, maybe there are some animals that can see ultraviolet. I'm not sure, but frogs definitely can see infrared. And I think it's like the vision of dogs and cats is different from the vision that human beings have. So you could ask this question, okay, but what does this marker look like in itself? What does marker look like in itself? What does the marker in itself look like? And Kant is going to say, it's fun to speculate about that, but we can never know. Because that's the whole point. It's as if we are trapped within our head, we're trapped within our mind, and we cannot, so we cannot know, we can't know. We are trapped within our head. Or actually, I am trapped in my head. I am trapped within my head. And I cannot, I cannot step outside. I can't step outside of my head and compare the marker as it is to the way it looks to me, and compare marker as is to the way and the way, and compare marker as it is to the way it appears, to the and the way it appears, and the way it appears to me. So this is something I cannot do. I cannot step outside. So I cannot have like a God's eye view of the world. And this is the famous idea, Kant's idea of things in themselves. So Kant's idea of things in themselves. And we talk about things in themselves in the plural, but strictly speaking, I'm not sure if there's one thing in itself or many things in themselves. Because, that's the whole point. I do not know what lies on the other side of my experience. So there must be at least one thing in itself. But how many, I have no idea. But more than one, I don't know. Than one, no. Pedantic students always ask me, how do I know that there are things in themselves at all? Well, the alternative is that the only thing that exists is my mind. So the alternative is solipsism. So solipsism is an interesting philosophical view. Comes from Latin solo ipso, which means only myself, something like that. Solo ipso in Latin, which means like is a view that only I exist in the world. Only I exist in the world. And you see, if that were true, if only I existed, and all of this was just figment of my imagination, then so I would say that, you know, solipsism is demonstrably false. And the demonstration is very simple. I look at this marker, and right now, instead of the marker, I want this to become an ice cream cone, or again, or a Sturmgewehr, or I don't know, Walther PPK, or Sherman Firefly. And you see, it's not happening. It's still a damn marker. So there must be at least one other thing apart from myself in the universe. There must be at least one other thing apart from myself in the universe which resists my consciousness. So at least one other thing in the universe apart from me which resists my conscious wishes. Try it. You know, if you have God's power and you can, you know, turn markers into ice cream cones or Sherman fireflies, then maybe solipsism is true. Solipsism is true, and you are actually God. But I know that I am not, demonstrably. Okay, so I want to talk about categories of perception, I guess. So categories of perception. And these would be like conditions of possible experience. Conditions of possible experience. And okay, what am I talking about? Let me try to make myself as clear as possible. So Kant is famous for asking this question about conditions of possibility. So Kant is famous for this question about conditions of possibility. Right now, we're talking about conditions of possibility of experience. And basically, it's like you can try to imagine some, I don't know, general metaphysical conditions of any possible experience. Of any experience at all. Like, you could say, why is there something rather than nothing? But then you can proceed down the ladder and you can say, well, let's talk about conditions of possibility of experience, of possible experience, or okay, for, I don't know, carbon-based life, or conditions of possible experience for mammals. Conditions of possible experience for Homo sapiens. And then talk about conditions of possible experience for University of London students in 2020. And then you can talk about conditions of possible experience for, insert your name. So basically what I'm doing is I'm saying that this is like a ladder. It's like presumably, well, okay, I'm not going to talk about this, general conditions of experience. Kant actually thinks that he's onto something, but that he can describe general metaphysical conditions of any experience at all. And this is what he calls the sort of transcendental knowledge. And, you know, many philosophers, including myself, we're not buying it. We don't think that Kant has discovered this. Conditions of possible experience for carbon-based life. We can understand. You know, we have some hypotheses about that. Let me write, just to bully people. Let me write Feynman diagrams. Feynman. So we think that Feynman diagrams actually give us. Nobody knows. You know, I would be surprised if at least one person understands what the hell am I talking about right now. You know, so crossing symmetry of Feynman diagrams. Crossing symmetry. Feynman diagrams. It would probably take me a class to explain what I've written here. So I'm not sure if I can explain in less than a class. So okay, not sure about mammals. Let's talk about Homo sapiens. So let's say we cannot see ultraviolet. So we can't see ultraviolet or infrared. But we can see certain colors. But we can, you know, see particular colors. This basically has to do with our perceptual apparatus, right? So for example, again, my dog and your dog, if you have a dog, can hear infrasound. I cannot hear infrasound. So this sort of, I cannot hear infrasound, but I can hear other kinds of sounds, right? And this is like the general condition for Homo sapiens. So all Homo sapiens, presumably, or at least all anatomically normal Homo sapiens. So an anatomically normal, or let's say statistically normal, statistically. Yeah. But then you talk about this conditions of possible experience for University of London students. Well, for example, you know English. Right. And so now we are getting, so presumably, if this is a matter of biology, this is now a matter of culture. So here we have a transition, broadly speaking, from biology to culture. So I'm not sure if I can. Come on, something's gotta give. Okay. Yeah, okay, this will work. Come on. This takes time. On the board, it takes slightly less time. Anyway, so basically, like presumably, what we have above the red line has to do with biology and physics, and below the red line, we're talking about culture. So physics and biology. And here we're talking about culture. Now, I am spending a lot of time on this, but I think it's kind of an important thought. This is basically the upshot of this notion of social construction of reality. Social construction of reality. sort of you see the world in a particular way simply because you were brought up in a particular culture. And conditional possible experience, insert your name. This would have to do with accidents of your biography. Accidents of individual biography. Individual biography. Like idiosyncratic personal associations. Like so idiosyncratic meaning personal associations. Associations like in the Freudian sense. Okay, and I broke my slide. Yeah, okay, it's 14 now. So basically, and again, in some ways, we're going to return back to this idea when we talk about Foucault, for example, or to some extent Marx, to some extent Nietzsche. This notion of ideology. But again, go back to this idea. Nobody. Okay, I had this somewhere. Yeah, nobody is a policeman or a criminal or a teacher by nature. Reality is socially constructed. And if you think about this in terms of Hume, in terms of David Hume, so David Hume will talk about these artificial virtues. Oh, David Hume, artificial virtues. It's like ever since you are born, your parents teach you this is a policeman. This is a person like with authority, right? This is what a policeman looks like. So that right now, like today, if you meet a policeman on the street, if a policeman stops you, says, "Good day, may I see your papers, please?" You have certain feelings, right? Again, and it's not because the policeman, like in and of themselves, inject chemicals into your brain, but it's because you have been brought up in a particular culture. Again, nobody is a policeman by nature. So again, there's an element of upbringing. In some sense, like go back to Protagoras. So compared to Protagoras, this idea that we are trained basically to be afraid of the police. Or we are trained to feel really bad when we run a red light. To feel bad when we run a red light or when we lie. Etc. And this is sort of this idea of irrational basis. Irrational basis of human behavior. Now, I should be getting to some other technical things in Kant. Let me mention at least one other thing. So Kant versus Hume. Should I even talk about this? Okay, let me say this. This is less important for our purposes, but let me just mention this in one sense. So Kant thinks that he has invented this stuff called synthetic a priori, and these are like necessary non-trivial truths. Non-trivial truths. And basically, what Kant is talking about, and Hume will have none of this. Hume does not believe in this. But basically, Kant is saying that he's going to say that causation. So for Kant, causation is true. The true relationship. So A causes B is true, not because it's part of the world, but because it's part of the mind. So things like causation for Kant. Things like causation. Try to do this way. So Kant wants to say that I will see the world. So future will resemble the past. Future will resemble the past, not because the world stays the same, but because my mind stays the same. And Hume is basically saying, no. Why? Why the heck? Where did you get that idea? Where did you get this wonderful idea? Okay. It's like, okay. Let me be academic. Your mind will stay the same. Let me say, you sure that your mind will stay the same? Like that. Let me do this maybe in red. This is what Hume says. Like basically, Hume's gonna say, oh, why do you think that, Kant? Do you, any reason? It's like a bold statement. Bold statement. Can you prove it? Bold statement. Can you prove it? This is basically what Hume says to Kant. And again, many philosophers, for better or for worse, believe that Kant is the most important philosopher of all times and places. I disagree for this reason, because I think that this Humean criticism Kant cannot respond to. Okay. Now, finally, let's get to. We don't have a lot of time, but it's important. Let's talk about Kant's moral philosophy. I keep doing this. Kant's moral philosophy. And basically, Kant. Again, I have to apologize. I'm not the best person to explain Kant's moral philosophy because I'm not very sympathetic to Kant, and I understand that pedagogically it's a problem. Pedagogically, it's a defect, and I have to try my best, especially if I'm going to have to record this for Coursera. I need to try to cultivate my inner Kant and try to sort of get more sympathetic. But alas, I'm going to be critical. I apologize in advance for that. Basically, Kant is saying that. Like he's gonna say, okay, like if Hume is right, and nothing is good, that nothing is good in itself, nothing is good in itself, then life makes no sense. This is what Kant is gonna say. Therefore, this is all Kant. Let's assume. Well, this is not a quote. Okay, this is not a quote, but this is me paraphrasing Kant. Therefore, let's assume that there is something good in itself. And basically, Kant is going to say, for something to be really good, it has to be universally good. And basically, what does it mean to say universally good? So universally good. So we're just trying to explain this phrase universally good. And Kant is going to say, there are things such as, hypothetical imperatives, hypothetical imperatives. Kant is a university professor. And because he's a university professor, he invents all of this horrible jargon, for better or for worse. You see, philosophers we have talked about before, most of them were writing for broad audience, for broad public. So they had to make themselves clear. Because Kant is a university professor, he invents this technical jargon. So basically, hypothetical imperative is like, if you want to make an omelet, then this is an example of a hypothetical imperative. Wow, Microsoft Office doesn't know the word omelet, but I hope this is the way the omelet is spelled. Then, you know, like begin by breaking a couple of eggs. Break a couple of eggs. So this is a hypothetical imperative. So we are almost ready to understand one of the most famous ideas in all of philosophy, categorical imperative. So basically, categorical imperative is a way of talking about precisely this issue, universal truth. Or universal, sorry, not universal truth, but universal goodness. And I still cannot spell. So categorical imperative goes something like this. You see, hypothetical imperative, hypothesis, right? If you want to do A, then do B. So if you want A, do B. And this is basically exactly Hume. Hume's definition of goodness. Hume or Hobbes or Mill. This is what they're going to say, that morality is simply a question of your desires. If you want to survive, says Hobbes, then you know, obey the government that protects you, right? And Hume says, sort of, again, Hume doesn't like the idea of the contract, but he says, you know, if the government is in your interest, is in the common interest, then obey the government, right? So hypothetically, but there's nothing good in and of itself. And Kant says, basically, categorical imperative is the idea that for any circumstance, for any A, do B, which is to say, same thing as simply always, no matter what, no matter what, always do B. This is what the word categorical imperative means. And notice, Hume is going to say, this is fine. Like, Hume is going to say, I understand, Kant, what you are talking about. It's just that these things don't exist. So like if you try to, you know, make this into a statement, so like break a couple of eggs for no matter what. Like, no matter what, break eggs. No matter what, break eggs. Always, no matter what, always break eggs. Now, obviously, this is not the example that Kant is going to give, right? Because he says, yeah, this is an example of a categorical, but it's not really a categorical imperative. So Kant is going to say, let's imagine, for him, let's say, always tell the truth. Now, this is closer to the example of a categorical imperative. And Hume is going to say, these things don't exist. Like, categorical imperatives don't exist. Categorical. Don't exist for Hume, but for Kant they do. Now, for Kant, again, so so Kant's categorical imperative. Again, like the classical formulation is this: Handle so, dass die Maxime deines Willens jederzeit zugleich als Prinzip einer allgemeinen Gesetzgebung gelten können. Always act in such a way so that the maxim of your action can at the same time rationally will to be the universal law. So always act in such a way that you can rationally will, not want, not desire. Because desires are hypothetical. That the principle of your action, he calls it a maxim, principle of your action, become or be at the same time be a universal law, at the same time act in such a way that, okay, that the principle of your action, how do you say this in English? That you can rationally will, that the principle of your action at the same time be or become the universal law. For what? For all rational creatures. That's right, creatures. Creatures implies it created. Beings of the universe, including aliens and angels. Including aliens and angels. Kant was also an astrophysicist. So he actually has a cosmological theory of aliens and angels. Categorical narrative. So, and notice. Categorical imperative is not the golden rule, because the golden rule relies on desire. And categorical imperative does not rely on desire, it relies on reason alone. Your reason. And basically, for Kant, this is sometimes called the universalizability criterion. And the idea of the universalizability, the idea of the universalizability criterion is that, again, like Hume would say this doesn't work. Hume would say it doesn't work. But Kant does not believe that, right? And you see, the problem, the big problem with Kantian ethics is that it's very difficult to actually derive any positive statements from the categorical imperative, because you need to find a maxim that it would be irrational not to adopt. So Kant gives some examples. The most famous example is this. Let's imagine, so Kant's example is, imagine I want to borrow. You borrow without the intention of giving back. Now Kant says, imagine that the principle of your action at the same time becomes the universal law. So you universalize that. So if it becomes the universal law, it means that everybody borrows without the intention of giving back, or everybody can borrow without the intention of giving back. Everybody can borrow without giving back. And Kant says, notice what happens. If everybody can borrow without giving back, then the meaning of the word borrow is destroyed. Then the meaning of the word borrow is destroyed. So trying to universalize this maxim, borrowing without intention of giving back, you run into a self-contradiction. It's like, again, the principle of your action, when it is universalized, destroys itself. Because if everybody borrows without the intention of giving back, then the meaning of the word borrow is destroyed, and borrow just means take. Borrow just means take. Right? But you know, that's the whole point. Borrow does not mean take. And does not mean steal. So the whole practice of borrowing becomes impossible, if you want. Borrowing possible. So you run into a self-contradiction. So this is a self-contra. And therefore, Kant believes that basically, if you borrow, you have to intend to give back always. So when you, therefore, when you borrow, you have to always intend to give back. I'm tired of typing. When you borrow, you must intend to give back. And otherwise, it is irrational. Now, I think there are so many holes in this argument that you can basically drain spaghetti through it. And basically, you know, everybody starting with Hegel, well, I don't want to say everybody, but almost everybody starting with Hegel will criticize Kant. I pressed something. Sorry. Problems. Categorical imperative. So Hume is going to say, no, reason isn't to be the slave of the passions. Reason is the slave of the passions. And Hegel is going to say that categorical imperative is empty formalism of duty for duty's sake. Empty formalism of duty for duty's sake. That basically categorical imperative is fruitless. It's empty. You cannot derive any positive state, any real positive statements from it. I would also add, and some other philosophers are saying that, you know, basically, if you're clever enough, any action can be made moral depending on the rule. Like if you are clever enough, you can always find a maxim. You can always find a loophole. So for example, let's say, you know, okay, the principle of my action, remember here, is that borrowing without the intention of giving back. But let's suppose the principle of my action is that it's all right to borrow on Thursdays without the intention of giving back, but on every other day it's fine. Or let's say, if you are starving, it's fine to borrow without the intention of giving back. Notice, if you are starving without, and then it's fine. Then notice the meaning of the word borrow is not destroyed, because borrowing does not become impossible. So basically, like, it depends on the principle of your action. And actually, well, yeah. So actually, you know, I think Arendt gives this example. Hannah Arendt gives this example when she talks about Eichmann in Jerusalem. So Arendt gives this example, Hannah Arendt, about Eichmann. And basically, Eichmann is going to say, look, when I have sent the communists, homosexuals, and the Jews to the concentration camps, the principle of my action was not, so Eichmann is going to say, not, kill people, but the principle of my action was obey the government. So the principle of my action, not kill people, but obey government. And in that case, according to Kant, that should be fine. So again, it's like depends on the way you construct this. Like honestly, some of you may want to look this up because Arendt actually discusses Kant with respect to Eichmann in this famous pamphlet, Eichmann in Jerusalem. I don't remember exactly what she says. It's a bit more nuanced than this, but that's the basic idea. And so, but notice, it is very much true. It is certainly true for Kant that the same action can have different motives. So, for example, Kant would say that murder is wrong, but death penalty is fine. This is what Kant is going to say. So you see, it's like if I walk outside the door and I see a random person in the street, can I kill them? Well, if I want to kill them just for fun, Kant says no. But if I have some kind of moral justification for killing them, well, let's say, I don't know, my sacred book of Revelation tells me that I gotta kill this person, then maybe it's fine. It depends on your justification. So again, the problem with categorical imperative is that it's not very concrete. You see, again, in this sense, the consequentialist ethics of Hobbes, Hume, and Mill are much more concrete because they're going to like common interests. So again, like for Hume, common interest is much easier to calculate. It's much easier to calculate, and seems to be more objective. So for Hobbes, Hume, and Mill, they would say that common interest is more concrete. Easier to calculate and is more objective. Easier to calculate and is more objective. And it's like at the end of the day, Hobbes, Hume, and Mill are going to say, Kant is just wrong because reason is the slave of the passions. So Hume, Hobbes, and Mill are going to say reason is the slave of the passions. Reason cannot legislate. Like from the very beginning, Kant is wrong, dead wrong. It's like he's not true. And also notice there's a factual criticism. Because if it was possible to derive rational, so if rational morality was possible, where is it? Why is it that, let's say, the United Nations has not agreed on it yet? So Kant imagines that there's this simple, straightforward procedure, but we know as a matter of fact, there is no consensus. As a matter of empirical fact, there is no consensus. And this is a big problem for Kant. Let me also give you sort of Kant's political philosophy is complicated. But Kant is going to say a bunch of things. So just for fun, when he talks about the categorical imperative, he says that there are different formulations. One of them is that you should always treat people. So treat people as ends, never as mere means. Although it's not clear. Does it apply to women, and does it apply to slaves? Does it apply to black people? Oh, this is an ugly story of racism and Kant's political philosophy. I don't want to go there, but it's not pretty. Okay. Also, Kant is going to say, treat yourself as an end, never as mere means. And this actually leads Kant, okay, I'm having a bit of fun at Kant's expense. You'll have to excuse me. I deeply apologize for this example, but I have to give this example. Kant actually thinks that he can rationally prove that masturbation is immoral. Rationally prove that masturbation immoral. It's against the categorical imperative. He writes this in his book Metaphysics of Morals. So it breaks the categorical imperative. So it's like for somebody who thinks that he has discovered rational morality, this is a very interesting statement. Also, Kant is going to say that according to categorical imperative, you must obey the government. You must always obey the government. I cannot spell. I still cannot spell. Whoops. Okay. The government. And now I've pressed something. Okay. Government. Which means that there's absolutely no right of resistance. No right of resistance whatsoever. So this is actually, colleagues, this is much worse than Hobbes. Because for Hobbes, if your life is threatened, then you can protect yourself. For Kant, you can never protect yourself. So what do? You die a martyr's death, and pray to God. This is Kant's solution. And Kant has this very famous phrase. He says, well, this is an ancient dictum, which goes back to, I'm not sure. I think it goes back to Augustine, maybe. Anyway, the idea is that let the world perish, justice be done. Let the world perish, justice be done. Now, is this good political advice? I don't know. You tell me. So basically, this is what Kant's morality comes down to. Like, and okay. So we should. I should continue at least a little bit, right? So how can Kant make this work? And again, remember. We began by saying that Kant said that if Hume is right, nothing is good in itself. Life makes no sense. So Kant is going to say that Kant's practical postulates. So basically, what Kant is going to say that reason is limited. Therefore, we need faith. So sometimes this is phrased in limit reason to make room for faith. And more specifically, Kant is going to say that morality requires that there is God, soul, immortality, etc. And basically, the idea being that this world is unjust, the world is unjust. There must be afterlife. Basically, heaven and hell. Make sure that virtue is rewarded. That virtue is rewarded with happiness, and vice is punished with hell. So God, soul, immortality, freedom also. And basically following Hume, Kant agrees with Hume. Kant agrees with Hume that we can't prove the existence of God, soul, immortality, and freedom. But we postulate or assume, but we must assume they exist for moral reasons. Basically, let's sort of otherwise, morality does not make sense. And again, I apologize for not being particularly sympathetic, but Hume and Hobbes and Mill, and especially people like Nietzsche and Marx are going to say, especially Nietzsche and Marx, they would say morality, like your petty bourgeois morality, Kant, is impossible. But we will have a new morality, which is fine without God. So sort of like basically your Kantian petty morality is impossible. But we'll have a new morality. We'll have a new morality without God, soul, immortality, and freedom. Maybe I should talk about this a bit more. So, especially sort of in Hume, right? I talked about this last time. Well, we keep circling around this. God, this problem of evil, sort of. Again, notice. Both Kant and Hume will agree that, again, you see, I'm not even sure if there's a marker in front of my face. You know, God is not, and like God cannot be an object of experience. We don't have experience of God. We don't experience God. And also, there's the problem of evil. But we do experience evil. Problem of evil. Therefore, there's no reason to suppose that there's God. No reason to believe that there's God. And Kant agrees with this. We don't experience God, and Kant agrees that we cannot solve the problem of evil. You see, that's the whole point. Kant thinks we cannot solve the problem of evil. That's why we assume that there's God in the afterlife, so that the problem of evil will be solved in the afterlife. And Hume just says, you know, it's an interesting assumption, but there's no reason to assume that. So talking about the soul, Hume is going to say same thing. We don't experience I don't experience my soul. I don't experience my own soul. And this, by the way, opens the door to Nietzsche and Freud on the unconscious. Who will say, indeed, especially Freud, that yes, you don't experience your soul. And in fact, your soul is made of many parts, and they are at war with one another. And in fact, you don't control yourself. And you are it's like a person is a bundle of perceptions. It's like Nietzsche has this wonderful phrase that the I is an empty tautology. And in fact, we have a myriad of souls within ourselves fighting for control. Well, Nietzsche is going to say there's many souls inside me fighting for control. And again, compare to Freud. Freud again talks about this: id, ego, superego, id, ego, superego. Immortality. Again, well, we talked about immortality. Of course, you know, we don't experience afterlife. So, no reason to believe in immortality. This is Hume. And lastly, freedom. So Hobbes and Hume and Mill are determinists, meaning that humans are not free, but we are pre-programmed by biology or by something like that. Like, again, life is but a motion of limbs, and you know, determinism, like no freedom, no free will. To be more precisely, to be free is simply to be determined. So we're always determined by internal psychological causes. But there's no such thing as libertarian free will. In fact, sort of, I'm standing here in front of you, and I have two arms. Which arm am I going to raise, left arm or right arm? You don't know, and maybe even I don't know. But in fact, there's a mechanistic process in my brain which determines that I will raise my left arm. And in principle, if you had something like a brainoscope, or if you were a Laplacian demon and you could know the positions and momenta of every particle in the universe, you could predict with 100% certainty what I'm going to do. Something like that. Okay. I don't know. I feel that maybe I have to draw some kind of a conclusion. I understand that we have run out of time, you know, a long time ago. But still, I need to wrap this up at least a little bit. So let me wrap this up with this slide, because in many ways this is the most important slide. So for Hobbes, Hume, and Mill, it is the passions that define what is good. That, you know, there's no absolute truth about morality. Justice simply is common interest. And, you know, we don't need God. And morality cannot be defined, you know, again, so we have rational morality. Here we have emotivist theory of morality. So, and, whoops. And again, and reason is only instrumental. And at the end of the day, like, the purpose of government, the purpose of politics is to maximize pleasure, minimize pain. Sorry. So it's like nothing more sort of more ambitious than that. It's merely. So this deflation of capital V values. Whereas for Kant, let me delete Locke and Hegel because it's more complicated. For Locke and for Hegel, it's also complicated. Hegel will criticize Kant immediately. It's like, again, let the world perish, justice be done. And, you know, is this sound political advice? Not sure. It's like die martyr's death. You know, die martyr's death, if need be. And sort of, no, Kant wants to assert capital V values. And again, here we don't have instrumental rationality, but reason through the categorical imperative and legislate. Well, you see, again, Kant is writing after Hume, so he understands that you cannot prove it, but you assume. It's a postulate that you assume that reason can actually legislate through the categorical imperative, because you cannot prove it. And Kant knows this. Like, for any of your actions, you can never be sure if they are free or if they are moral, because like you don't observe. It's not available to your experience, but you postulate for the sake of morality. And this is the most important part of the picture. Like, if you did not understand everything else apart from the picture, if you did not understand anything else from the class, this is the most important slide. Again, you cannot prove God, but you assume. So you can't prove, but assume, etc., etc. And basically, that's the story. I'm sure I forgot to talk about a million other things, and you know, maybe I'll come back to them. But this has been going for slightly longer than I planned, as always. So I should stop here. I should definitely stop here. So colleagues, thank you so very much for your, thank you so very much for your company. It's always a pleasure to hang out together. If you have any questions, I would be happy to answer. Otherwise, thank you so very much, and probably I will see you sometime in the seminars. Okay, let me stop the recording.